I'm Alex Mak. This is Coffee Talk.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Perlak. I'm the chair of the guitar department, Berklee College of Music, and welcome to another Coffee Talk. We're joined, as usual, by our assistant chair, Sheryl Bailey. Hey, good morning, Sheryl.
How you doing?
Great to see you. Ben Cody, our senior coordinator, is also here, as usual. Ben, say hi to the people listening.
Hello, everyone.
And our special guest today is Alex Mak, who's an alumnus of Berklee's guitar department, and he's playing on Broadway. He's a music preparation expert and also a great guitarist working on tour as a side person and a band leader. Welcome, Alex. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me. Really good to be here.
Yeah, it's great. We're really excited to hear what you've been up to and get into some great conversations. But first, we want to know, are you drinking coffee these days, and how are you taking it?
Yeah, no coffee, unfortunately. I got hot water, which is kind of a Chinese thing I grew up with. It sounds a little strange, but once you get into it, I find it's very soothing, very comforting.
Okay,
So,
now, so you said you grew up with it. Did your parents do this or relatives do this?
yeah, my grandparents, on my dad's side were pretty into it. They're Chinese. And then my dad a little bit too, but it was mainly that generation. So whenever you'd go to a restaurant, they'd always be asking for hot water, which depending on where you go gets a interesting look sometimes, but it's really good. If you try it, I think it converts most people.
So, Alex, do you do it throughout the day or only in the morning, or like what's the strategy and what does it do for you?
Yeah, I wish there was a little more routine than there is. I mean, I love water of all sorts. Generally, I'm always trying to keep a bottle close to me or just a mug just to keep things going throughout the day, especially because when I'm working a lot of the time, I'm at the desk for a while. So I like it, either in the mornings or the nights, hot
Mhm.
specifically. And it's nice. I think it just kind of eases you in if you're feeling a little under the weather, definitely opens things up. So
So there's a medicinal benefit to it.
a little bit. I think some people will say that there is certain medical benefits to it, just
Mhm.
drinking hot as opposed to cold, which I don't know if I'm like fully on that train, but nonetheless, it feels good. So
That's
yeah,
great.
that's about it.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for sharing that technique. That's really great. Um, so the another question that we ask a lot, especially this time of year, as people are thinking about coming to Berklee. In fact, today is May the 1st, so all the students who will come in the fall decide today if they're
Wow.
coming. And so we asked people to talk about some of their first impressions of Berklee. What was your first day like? Do you have a recollection of that?
I do. And I kind of had two first days, funny enough. So my first experience with Berkeley was at the Guitar Sessions program, which was the summer right before my senior year of high school. And I knew about Berkeley because so many of the players that I really loved, Ian Thornley from Big Wreck was a big one, Mike Stern, Wayne Krantz. You always heard the name thrown around without necessarily knowing what it was about, what the actual material entailed.
Mhm,
But
mhm,
knowing it was this kind of safe haven for guitarists that wasn't restricted to a specific genre, a classical jazz dichotomy, something like that, was really interesting to me. So I was
mhm,
fortunate to apply to the program. It was a week-long kind of thing.
mhm.
And once I got there, it was the most guitarists I'd seen in my life, I think, as y'all both know. Just to see that many people coming from all over the world doing their own thing, it was really inspiring and a little bit of a fire under me. I remember the first classes I had, the morning was Jim Peterson. We had a funk ensemble, which in that week I probably learned more, I think, in than in a year or so of just self-teaching, studying. Then after that, I had theory with Robin Stone, which was super cool too, just because it made me realize how much I didn't know. And it was a really cool feeling. It was very liberating too. And then the afternoon, I had this kind of ensemble with Bruce Bartlett, who was my guy at Berkeley. I can really credit him, I think, as one of the most important teachers that I've had this entire time. And the one story I always remember from that day, so Bruce had maybe there's around like six people playing all guitarists around him. Each kind of had their own things. There was a guy from the Netherlands who played a fretless guitar, which was super cool. There's a guy from Hong Kong, another great guitar player, a few people my age. And he started off before like really diving into the material by just playing with everyone one on one to build that connection, that rapport. And to hear everyone was so cool. And when it got to me, like we just started playing and it felt very instantaneous. We were going out, doing stuff like that, which wasn't something I had experience with, but he made it feel very intuitive.
Mhm.
And after that, I think just that moment, realizing where the music was going, where you were feeling from that, that had kind of sold me. And I think by then, like everything else was erased. This was where I was going. This is what I was doing. So yeah, it was a great
That's
time.
great. That's great. Can you talk a little bit about your experience as a student at Berklee because it was fairly recent?
Yeah,
Were there classes or guitar teachers or classes that stood out to you as you kind of integrated now doing both performing and writing?
definitely. So when I had come into Berkeley, I had really not been playing jazz at all until maybe just dabbling my senior year of high school. And I'd always come from a rock blues background, like
Mhm.
Eddie Van Halen, Jimmy Page. That was kind of my bread and butter. And I had started to get into Alan Holdsworth right near when I finished, which opened my ears up to a lot more sounds, harmonies, and all of that. But when I went to Berkeley, I decided that I really wanted to focus in on this jazz thing just because it was that elusive. And I felt that with my own self-study, it wasn't getting where I wanted it to be. And I wasn't really getting inside of it in a way that felt like home or natural.
Mhm.
So going there and meeting so many phenomenal guitarists who kind of walked in both worlds or were firmly in one world, it was really cool just to see everyone's perspectives. David Tronzo was a big one, just
Mhm.
in terms of his blending of like blues, the avant-garde that comes with his slide playing and how his slide playing has a lineage to it
Mhm.
that comes from like Little Feat or it comes from, all of these great Delta blues players as well. But he was able to mix it with contemporary classical music, which was also something I loved.
Mhm.
Whether it was, more maximalist works, more minimalist works, he could apply harmony and counterpoint in a way that I guess is kind of what you'd call a postmodern approach to things, in which everything is almost equal. And when you assemble it all together, you get this really cool mix that is both new, old, timeless. It was really appealing, and hearing him talk about composing, band leading was really influential to me, even if I wasn't doing the same things that he was doing.
Mm. That's great. I have a question for you about the way you approached your study, and I can tell Cheryl has some thoughts too. Um, One thing that stood out to me after you took the class that David and I taught together about modern writing was that you approached all your assignments in this very creative, artistic, but in-depth way. In fact, I learned a lot from looking at your assignments because they were so beautifully crafted, the notation software that you used, the way that you presented them. And it just kind of put in the back of my mind, like, I am not skilled in that area. And this is a person who I hope to work with in the future, even when you were our student. And I'm wondering if you can talk even a little bit more about the way you approached classes, because I feel like you were a person that was on track to approach your studying as a student with a look ahead about what kind of professional colleague you wanted to be. And I think that's in common with a lot of your teachers were having the same experience I was, like just putting a note in our minds, like, wow, the way this person approaches my class makes me feel like we're going to be working together in the future.
Thank you. Wow, that really means a lot. Like, and that class was such a game changer. I
Mhm.
think when I had first gotten and dove into things within those first few semesters, it really became apparent that the amount of information that I was taking in, the amount of stuff I was getting, was nowhere near the amount that it was far more than what I could possibly synthesize in the same amount of time. And I think it's a common experience because whereas maybe a more traditional guitar program might be focused on like a private lesson studio, there's a lot less like of the lab emphasis or ensemble, stuff like that. Having all the labs with individuals from such different, unique backgrounds, covering so many different topics, really kind of had my brain pinballing for a second. And it was difficult to figure out where to put my time, where to focus. So because of that, I tried to make a conscious effort so that if I couldn't knock it down in the semester, I'd want to make sure I had a record of it so that when the time came and I had the tools to approach it, it was there for me to kind of self-study and get that sort of thing. So I tried to take as many notes as I could. Whenever I heard a name that I didn't know, whenever I heard an album that I hadn't heard, just trying to put that down and create lists so that over time I could start to listen to the stuff, come back to it. And like I remember when we were in that class, for example, modern writing, we had talked about a few composers. I think one of Tranzo's teachers was I th I think that I got the name wrong. It might be Edgar Grana or something.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah. From
And
Juilliard. Yeah.
yeah,
That's
so hearing that name, even if I didn't have the time in like the class load to listen to the music or see what he was up to, once I had that name in the back of my head, the next time I saw it, I think I was reading this interview with Kip Winger, the singer of the hair metal band, and he had studied with him. So
okay.
it's just one of those things that the more information you take in, everything starts to connect itself, and you start to be able to make these connections both for yourself and when you're talking to other people, which just it further like kind of deepens this web almost.
Hmm. Okay, my follow-up to that before I welcome Sheryl into this line of discussion is how did the pandemic semesters influence the way that you approached your study or even what you were studying or how you were going about it like this?
Yeah, what an interesting time. I mean, I don't think there's much that I could say about it that's hasn't already been said, just because it was a lot of change. It wasn't something people were prepared for. And I think I was fortunate in the sense that I was able to go back home to Toronto with my family. And in that time, it really presented a lot of opportunities for just self-study and really focusing on myself, practicing without a ton of distractions. I had found like when I was starting to this was like my second semester, kind of halfway through when the we had to go home. And I was seeing in my playing, certain things that I liked, certain things I wanted to shed. And getting at home, being kind of still taking classes, I found that I was doing Berklee almost 24/7 in a sense, just because the classroom was the bedroom and the bedroom was the practice room. And it all kind of became this one unit. And it had its pros and cons, I think. One kind of specific thing I could notice was that my time feel got worse just because it wasn't playing with people and it wasn't something that I had developed previously. That was something I was working on with Bruce a lot my entire time when I was at Berklee. And stuff like that, though, I don't think the issue was having the problem, but it presented an opportunity because if you're conscious of it, then it's just something you can practice and work on it. So I think by being alone and having private lessons, stuff like that going on amidst that, while having my own relationship to learning, it let me be a little more conscious of what I wanted to do. And it was very helpful in that sense. Does that kind of make sense, or?
It really does. Sheryl, do you want to jump in there with some thoughts on these threads?
Yeah, there's a couple things, Alex, you brought up there. That last thing that you said about you noticed your time suffer, your time field suffer because you weren't playing with others. This is so important in uh, playing music. We play music with each other, for other people, right? And that's, as much as we all need that time to shed sometimes and internalize something on our instrument or a concept, when you go out and play, that's actually you learn exponentially that much more, but also that thing of just connecting and grooving together. So that's really cool that you bring that up, and that was something that you noticed. That's really deep. But the thing about taking notes is so interesting because you know you were in my harmonic considerations class, and you were always there writing stuff down. And I think many people now think that the technology could replace that. And there are actually a lot of scientific studies about the whole thing about taking notes, the physicality of it, the eye hand coordination. It's another part of your senses to embed something in. And I am surprised sometimes that people just go, oh, they're sitting there without a notebook, or even if they say they're going to record it, I often question if you really will go back and listen to that later or take notes from it later, because there is that sense, especially at Berklee, where you're going to hit this place where you exactly what you're talking about, and I experienced that for sure at Berklee. You, it would be impossible to be able to master any of those things that you're coming, and it's coming at you really fast. So to take really meticulous notes for later is the best thing to do. And I still have my notebooks from Berklee. I'll have them my whole life. And, at that point, that skill of taking notes, and I really mean like writing down, is really important. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And I'm sure you still do that, right? So you're doing all these shows, Broadway and all these things. So you have to show up to rehearsal with a pencil, right?
Totally, yeah. The pencil is the main thing. I mean, now most theater shows people are using iPads. Just because I think the flexibility is unmatched when it comes to if a music supervisor wants to make last minute revisions, stuff like that. They can quickly change a key, transpose, and then just shoot it out over the iPads. And people will often have little styluses that they can physically annotate the stuff for. And it's still the same concept, I think. Like a lot of times, even now, most of the time when I'm doing note taking, it's just through the Apple Notes app on my computer. And through that, just keeping folders, stuff like that. It's kind of I think a way of being kind to your future self almost, just like what you said. And by having that, it just creates a little more momentum, I find, when you're trying to do something, when you're trying to figure something out.
Alex, one theme that I picked up on when Sheryl was talking and when you were talking is that you have become very aware of where your gaps are, where your strengths are, where your gaps are, and identifying, okay, in this moment, I can really dig in here. This, like the pandemic gave you this opportunity to develop your solo skills. And I felt like because I taught you in the pandemic, I could see that, like your score writing, as we talked about before, it became just super deep. Like you were working on how am I going to work on my sound and the way I can put all this stuff on solo guitar. And then you were aware that, wow, my inability to play with other people has made this other part of my playing with time go down. So when you came back, you focused heavily on that. And so it's not surprising when we look back and see where you are now that you were able to successfully take that experience and then apply it to the professional world and the different things that you've chosen to do, which is play in bands on the road, and then also work in Broadway, and then also work as a music preparation person. And you've really done something that so many people want to be able to do at a very difficult time. Like people are coming post-pandemic and they're saying, I just want to move to New York and I want to make all of my money working in music. And there's this fear of how would you do that in this day and age? And yet you did that. You went to New York at a volatile time with these skills that you developed, and you were able to do it. And I'd love for you to talk about how you did that. Like, how did you do that? Just moving to New York and setting yourself up with the idea that the way that you approached your education and your practice was part of that kind of career development. Could you talk about that for a little bit?
For sure, yeah. I was really fortunate, I think. One of the best things and one of the biggest helps that I can credit a lot to was the alumni mentor network that happened when I graduated out of Berklee. The Career Center paired everyone up with alumni that was in their city that they were moving in, usually, often with the same major that they were graduating from. And the whole reason I'm doing theater, I had never planned on doing it, was my alumni mentor was this phenomenal guitarist and a dear friend of mine named Matt Wong, who also graduated from Berklee maybe 4 or 5 years before me. Great player. And Matt had done a few Broadway tours, come from away. He also subbed on Broadway, and he was the original chair for this off-Broadway show that I play on now, Titanic. He had seen me play, and from that, asked if I wanted to sub. And even though it wasn't something I had planned, it seemed like such a great opportunity not to pass up. So from there, I got into the book, learning it, diving into the intricacies, all of these unique things that are the theater scene. And I was really fortunate to just really fall in love with it. And like I learned a ton from it. It's almost like a pop gig in the sense that a lot of theater these days is to a click, and it's all with in-ears too. So it's a bit of a different way of playing than with a band with amps, wedges, stuff like that. And it was really great. He decided to leave the show at the end of October of 2022 that year, and then they had asked me to take over the chair. So from there, that had really taken things off. I mean, aside from that, I was also doing a lot of teaching. I've pulled it back a little bit now just because I have a bit less free time, but I really love it. And the thing about the teaching really was I was looking for mainly in-home lessons, which is one great thing about New York. The public transit is such that you don't really need a car to get to a lot of people. So I basically just was cold emailing everyone I could. I'd look up a bunch of schools. If they published their rates, try to see what those were, eliminate ones that might not have worked for me. And then from there, I probably shot out maybe 50, 70 cold emails in a week to just a ton of schools, all with the resume, kind of my background of teaching, all of that. And from there, maybe I heard back from 5 if I was lucky. So the hit rate wasn't great, but at the end of the day, you only really need a few jobs to sustain yourself, provided that, they're not terrible and you can get students. So from there, that's another thing I'd recommend to people. If you're going to do the teaching thing through companies, it's really great if you can work for more than one company. Reason being, you can start to leverage them against one another almost, just so that once you're getting it more in demand from one, you can start to look at the other companies and just kind of explain the situation. And provided that, you're doing a good job and you're providing something of value, a lot of times it can really help you, get on a bit more stable footing through that.
Mm.
You know, Alex, I'm sorry, Kim, but something you said there really struck me because you said you didn't think about playing Broadway. It wasn't on your radar, or maybe some of these things weren't on your radar. But you've done your work on your musicianship to be prepared. Like, okay, well, let me try it, and then you found out, oh, I actually really like this thing. And I think that's the one thing that is so important to your success and to the success of people need to think about is you didn't turn it down and go, I hate Broadway. I don't have to do that. I only play this thing. I only do this thing. And you have that openness and the curiosity for a challenge where it took you, right? And then you got in there and said, hey, well, this is kind of cool. And you could use all your skill sets. And again, it kind of opens other doors, or the things which you're talking about there with finding, some teaching opportunities. You have to have that mentality of openness and welcome things. And through that, that's really how a freelance career is built. So good job there.
Oh, thank you. Definitely. I think from what you're saying too, it's almost, I think saying no is a luxury in a sense, in the beginning, especially, just from like a pure survival standpoint. And I've been fortunate now that I'm getting enough work that I'm able to tailor a bit more what I want to do. But before you've had the experience to try everything, I think there's just so much that can be different from one's preconceived notion of things. And just by having Berklee, I think, to create a holistic skill set, especially with the reading and knowing the fretboard, all of that, like those are skills that are going to work with anything, no matter what you're doing. And even with non-paper gigs, just having the reading for yourself if you need to take something down, transcribe something, like it always comes in handy somehow. So again, like it's just one of those things where the more that you've taught yourself, the more that you're equipped, the easier it is to kind of slide into any situation. And of course, it doesn't mean that it's going to be instantaneous. Like there's always going to be something to learn. But as long as you're just pushing for that, I think it can really be a great asset to have that holistic thing going on.
I love that. And I thought that same thing, Sheryl. Sometimes we see students who come in and say, I don't know why I have to do this reading. I'm an artist. I'm going to play my own music. I don't need to do this. Or why do I have to do this level of the proficiency? I'm going to get through it just to pass the test, but I don't really need it. If you don't do that, if you dig in because you just trust that for some reason it's going to be valuable, then you have it. And even if you don't play in that key or in that type of scale, it's made you look at the fretboard in such a deeper way that you will be faster with what you are using. And I think that it's such a great thing, Alex, to hear you say that, especially now that we're going to be in finals week when people are listening to this. And it's a good reminder of this is why you're doing this. If you're so stressed that you've forgotten why, this is why. It will help you. It will pay off. And that's why we do require it. So that's great to hear. Thank you for saying that. I had a question about to go back to the teaching aspect, when you were cold calling schools, what types of schools were they? Were they colleges? Were they secondary schools, private schools? What type of schools were you doing that with?
So it was all actually dedicated places for music instruction. So as opposed to being like an actual like school, it would be usually services that parents would go to for after school music lessons. And generally, at least in New York, there's a bit of a split between either working in a studio, so for a company at a specific location. School of Rock's a common one that a lot of people will work at. Guitar Center's another. Or you also have in-home lessons, in which the schools are really just the connection, and then from there, you're going yourself to the various homes and then teaching there.
Mhm.
And for me, I had chosen the latter route just because the hourly rate's a touch higher, and it's also slightly more flexible with your hours. So I knew that if I could work in the afternoons, I still had the evenings for myself, and I still had the mornings. So it was great in that respect. I think New York too, piano and guitar, and then voice probably in a tertiary element. Those are the three top instruments that most kids are wanting to learn these days. So if you also dabble in piano, that's another thing that can be really helpful. You don't have to be a master, but if you're able to teach, articulate, communicate yourself, and work with younger children, I think, like I've taught a ton of piano lessons and it's helped me view the guitar differently too. Like, again, it's just one of those things that the more that you kind of have in that net, the easier it's going to be to just kind of put something together, I found.
That's great. Did you create your own list for those schools, or was there some help that you got from the Career Center?
I did it all independently pretty much. I had found like I'd reached out to a few places through the Career Center and hadn't heard back, to be honest. So through that, it was just Googling different schools and then from there, trying to fine tune, see where most of the students were based, stuff like that.
Mhm.
And one thing I found too was you can always say no after you get something. So I don't think you should let maybe uncertainty about things prevent you from applying to something or going somewhere. At the end of the day, it's your decision. So I just tried to, again, cast that wide net and then from there, hone things back.
That's great. You're also touring. You're also doing music preparation work, and you're also composing and scoring. Can you talk about how you've approached your professional work in those three areas in the last couple years?
Of course. So touring's probably the main thing right now that I'm doing aside from theater. I was just got off this tour playing bass and guitar for this great pop artist Mark Amber, which was so much fun. In February, which is when I last saw you, we had done a bit of a North American run. We did a flight in LA in March, and then this April we did Arizona in Europe, which was so much fun. So coming into that sort of thing, it was interesting. I actually got the gig, not because of one of my own connections, but my girlfriend, she had used to work at this entertainment law firm, and one of the other legal assistants was the music director. So when he was putting together the band, he knew that I had the off-Broadway show. And from that, then we got connected, we hit it off, I sent some videos over, and it led to this really beautiful relationship with us. So again, you don't know where the work's going to come sometimes, but just having the open heart, being nice to people, all of that. It's just, aside from it being professionally gratifying, I think, it's just the right thing to do too. So that's been really great. And the touring thing, New York has a little less of it compared to Nashville or LA, but nonetheless, there is still definitely options out there. The hardest thing I think is going to be figuring out the kind of opportunities you want to take, the artists that are there. But a lot of it is figuring out if artists don't already have an established music director, if you could take that role, or if there is a music director, getting to know them and just building that relationship.
Mhm.
With the
That,
composing and the music prep, I mean, I'm not doing as much composing as I'd want to right now. Like, I haven't touched it a ton in the last year, just with the schedule and all that. It hasn't been something I ha had the time for, unfortunately. But it's one of those things too that a lot of times people are going to be composing for video games, films, advertisements. And then if you're lucky, you might also be able to get some commissions, writing more like art music or through composed stuff. But with that kind of stuff, I think a big thing is creating a really strong reel, which is having like maybe a minute or so of your best work that shows your variety. Musical theater is the same thing. Usually, when you're reaching out to people, you send them your reel, which is you playing maybe different instruments, different genres, and creating something that's really strong. It's the equivalent of that resume or a business card that gives you something that you can send out with confidence when you're doing those cold emails, cold calls. So that
mm.
would probably be the biggest thing, I think, with that, getting a strong reel. And again, just trying to meet people who are doing something that you like and understanding how they're doing it. The music prep thing's probably the most flexible, just because it can be so many different things, whether it's transcribing, copyist work. And again, with a lot of that, it could be talking to people that are more experienced that have too much work right now and they need to farm some stuff off. It could be independently kind of advertising stuff like transcribing. With theater specifically, one common niche right now is when singers or actors do auditions, they typically need someone to create piano arrangements sometimes, or they might need to transpose something. So just doing small things like that could be something else. But there's a ton of opportunities out there.
Just so everyone knows, like I am one of Alex's clients for music preparation. And it has been such a great experience for me as an artist because we're doing my solo guitar playing and you're asking me to make decisions that I pretended I was free and artistically, but really I just didn't make a decision yet. And you're helping me as we're working through it. But what also is cool for me to learn about is the way that you do it professionally. Like you have, when we meet on Zoom, you have an hourly rate that you set up. And then also you're working through the union in terms of like getting a contract that has like a rate for how it works. And then that is assisting you, I'm sure, with health benefits and feeling more stable professionally. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that aspect of it, about connecting with the musicians union and how that has helped you, or what that experience has been like.
For sure. So in New York, our local for AFM, which is the American Federation of Musicians, is local 802. And
Mhm.
with 802, generally the main areas that people are going to be joining the union for are orchestras. So if you're playing for the opera, the Met, the New York Phil, stuff like that, that's probably the most traditional and the bread and butter of what the union's doing. Then you have the theater musicians. So all of Broadway is going to be union. If you're lucky, off Broadway will be unionized. And again, with some of the workshops, recordings, that'll be union. And then the third area is the music prep, which is going to be for film and TVs. For theater, Broadway is probably the biggest one, at least in New York. And with those three areas, you really have to work through the union for the health benefits and the pension. And it's unfortunate, but like there's a lot of non-union gigs in the city just depending on what you're doing. So for example, if you're doing weddings, GB stuff, we'd call it club dates in New York, you're not going to see much union pay for that kind of stuff. Likewise, if you're playing jazz, pop, that kind of things, like you're not generally going to be playing two union agreements. And in those situations, though the union is great if you're able to get work that gives you the health benefits, it doesn't necessarily assure you of professional connections per se. You have to find those things yourself. So because of that, like I basically just joined the union once I had to through work. We had done a TV show with the off-Broadway show where we had played on NBC like Late Night with Seth Meyers, which was really cool. And because of that, that was on a union deal. So then I just joined then and then kept it going. But I would essentially, I guess, if I was to condense it into a piece of advice, I'd probably hold off on joining until your work necessitates that you join. And once, if you're looking to do those kinds of works, it can be a really great resource just because if there's an established agreement, it eliminates a lot of the back and forth negotiation almost, and it just kind of lays it down, and it works or it doesn't. So I found it really simplified things when it came to that side of things.
That's great. I just feel like everything you've said has been such incredible advice for everyone who's listening. And it's great to hear how you're balancing things and how you're able to take a step back and look at what you're doing and see if it's working for you. Um, Sheryl, what is on your mind as you're listening to the way Alex has laid out his approach?
Alex, you've sussed it out. You're a New Yorker now. Everything you said was right on, really, and great advice. I Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I should also preface by saying like Cheryl was a big help when I was first thinking about moving to the city. Like Cheryl, I also talked to Amanda Monaco quite a bit and David Gilmore. And all three of them, as New Yorkers, each had their own perspective on both the work industry and the living, which is such a big thing. Like whenever you're moving to any city, LA, New York, being able to be comfortable with the pace of life and all of the boring non-musical stuff, whether it's transit, rent, all of that, the sooner that you can free up your energy worrying about that kind of stuff, the easier it is to do all the fun stuff too. So like all of that stuff, it's all very useful and I really appreciated it. So thank you for that.
I am always happy to share my New York information with folks that are checking it out. So
I mean, this is another good endorsement for using office hours. I know that everyone feels like, you have a phone at your fingertips and so much information you can get digitally, but if you're on campus, go and talk to people one on one. Just go sit and just, even if you don't know what questions to ask, go and sit and listen. Like, what are some things? Like, here are a bunch of faculty members that you identified that either do something that you want to do or have lived in a place you want to live, and just go listen to what they have to say. You never know how much great information you're going to get, and it's totally worth taking the chance and booking 20 minutes or a half an hour with somebody. It really is.
For sure, yeah. No, the office hours were a big thing, both like from the playing and the like practical advice. Like I remember Rick Peckham had connected me with Berta, which was super huge during the pandemic just to get the right thing kind of happening. It's still not there, but just to kind of open up my eyes to that kind of thing. And it's just incredible how open people are with information, I think.
Mhm.
And people want to help share their knowledge. So having that opportunity just to know people both personally and from that educational standpoint, it's such a great asset that Berkeley has.
It's funny, Alex, because in just the last half hour, you've named 9 faculty members that you had specific things that you worked on with or learned from. And I think, when you think about that, everyone who's listening, I'm sure Alex could name more, but 9 off the top of his head. And so really think about that as a huge thing. And also you went to the Career Center and you joined the mentorship program and you said, like, here's where I want to go. What are all the resources that are available to me? And even if you're not a Berkeley student right now, there are resources like that that are either in people or programs that you might not think of, that you could sit down right now and make a list of, and just a conversation is a great starter for something that could really grow. So that's such a cool reminder. Ben, it also seems like a good segue to the question that you always ask people.
Okay, so yeah, we try to wrap up each podcast with this question. So what do you think is a question that Berkeley students should be asking once they get here that they're not thinking of asking?
Great question. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different angles you can approach it. And I think the question can be one of faculty, but it can also be one of themselves too. Like I think a lot of times to be honest with yourself and understand like where your strengths are, where you need to work on is such a big thing. And it's something that I think a lot of people, especially younger people that can have the ego and all of that, will be less comfortable to identify that there's areas that they are really deficient in or they need work on. And sometimes it can take a professor that's hard on you to get there. Other times it can take like kind of the beings like having that heart to heart with yourself. But trying to be conscious of where you want to grow, where you want to work, so that you're not just polishing what's already been polished is such a useful thing, I think. And just even flat out, like if let's say you're jamming with a professor, or you play a tune and Just say, how did it feel? Like, what were you thinking? Stuff like that. Trying to understand like the intricacies. Like in jazz, for example, the comping is always going to be the thing that gets neglected compared to the soloing, I think, as students. But the money's in the comping a lot of the time. And the skills that you're developing from the comping is going to be what propels the soloing. Likewise in rock, same kind of thing. You know, the rhythm playing, having that steady kind of thing going on. Like having the time feel is what lets like Slash fit like 7 notes into 6, that kind of stuff. And being able to be honest with yourself and know where you want to shed. I'd say like at least with my teaching, 80% of younger people, it's the time. That's the thing that can really like grow. But whatever it is for yourself, being honest with yourself and trying to figure out a way to get there so that you're building everything up and leveling everything out. That's kind of the thing for me at least.
Alex, there's so many great things in what you just said. I feel like people should go back and listen to that last 30 seconds over and over again. One thing that stands out now, I think that's really hard for some students, especially people who are younger and less experienced, is that thing you said about having a teacher that really pushes you or has that hard lesson with you. You seem to have been able to take that to heart and not have it upset you and make you kind of turn internally. It made you look at things that you could build. How did you keep that positive or find that positive approach to criticism? That how did you find a way to make that constructive?
Yeah. Um, I was thinking about this a little bit a few weeks ago, just and when it comes to being a learner, like what's maybe the most conducive to creating that environment. And what I kind of stumbled upon, at least how I think about it, is there's two kinds of confidence that I think need to be kind of worked on in tandem. One is kind of an earned confidence for me, and that comes from learning, that comes from practice. It's having the knowledge that based on the preparation you've done, that you're prepared for whatever's to approach you. You know, you've done the work to practice, now you're ready for the next step. But the other thing that I think is the one that people can lose, and that's the difficult one, is the blind confidence, which is what comes from just, you know, having faith that it's going to work out, and also knowing that you're here for a reason and, you know, you've made it this far. And I think like with music, you know, the blind confidence, that's the punk thing, that no matter what's going on, you're getting something there, you're delivering that thing. But at the same time, you can always have that and mix the earned thing in too with the learning, you know, tightening things up, cleaning it up. And when it came to lessons, you know, I think a lot of the times too, like I'd sometimes find like the scary kind of thing almost funny in a sense, just because it is it is a teaching technique, but at the same time, I think it's almost a lot of fluff to convey something that's important. And once you realize that it is fluff and it's, you know, it's not like a personal kind of thing, it does make it a little easier. And it's gonna be, you know, it's scary when someone yells at you and all of that. But at the same time, it is almost like it's music. You know, if you play a wrong note, no one's gonna die, hopefully. And I think by taking that step back and understanding that what we're doing isn't this life or death thing, it also helps kind of lighten it up so that you're able to mold things and just kind of take things where they go as opposed to being stuck in one thing. And it's easier said than done. Like I've definitely struggled with it. But to have that knowledge and almost ability to step back and look at the complete picture, like that's probably like it for grounding me at least.
I love that. My last question is, what are you doing to keep yourself inspired with all the work that you're doing? Do you have a creative project or a creative way of practicing that's just for you these days?
I think a lot is just listening to music. And for me, like listening's always been a form of practice in itself because when I'm listening, hearing the time of people playing, hearing the voicings, how things fit together, all of the production elements, like I find there's so much you can learn from just listening to something actively without even touching the instrument. And when it comes to me, like staying creative, it's listening to stuff that's pushing me or I don't really get, and then trying to figure out how would I approximate that, or how would I do something differently, maybe. And just by having those creative questions for yourself, I think it keeps the brain going in a way that enables you that when you come to like a more like formal work situation, you're still asking those questions and you're still taking that mindset in. Like the brain, like it's a creative muscle almost. And as long as you can keep that going, whether it's through improvisation, composing, or like almost like I think of it as musical problem solving. Like it can be really fruitful, I think, when it comes to your approach with others and working with them.
Sheryl, what's on your mind as we kind of wrap up this hour here together?
Wow, Alex, it's really great conversation. You've shared so many great strategies for learning and for developing a career. And wow, thanks for coming and congratulations on everything. And yeah, we'll see you around for sure. We'll see you maybe everywhere.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot.
Ben, what about you?
I think my biggest takeaway really is just the mindset
Mhm.
and just kind of that overall awareness. I mean, you're very aware as a student, you're kind of always looking downfield too, so to speak, as far as, this is where I am, this is where I want to go, and this is how I get there. And it's kind of very, just having that professional mindset, from the very beginning. And I think that's something that's really, really important.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that what I love about it is it's so hopeful because you hear a lot of people worried these days, like, where are we going now that we're done with the pandemic? We're in a new phase moving forward. And people are asking, is there an opportunity for me to make my life in music? And the clear answer from you is absolutely there is. You just have to be prepared and open and have a strategy and have an idea of what you want to do and then a clear way of working with it. And I think this is going to be one of those that people will really listen to and hopefully use to help find their version of what you're doing. Is there any last advice you want to share as
Hmm.
we wrap up the coffee? Any final thoughts of advice?
Yeah, I mean, on a practical perspective, I think self-teaching is a skill, just like anything else. And the more that you can do that, that's probably, I think, the biggest thing that's helped me. So being able to teach yourself, like there's so much, just because it's not a class doesn't mean that it's something that isn't worth learning. And if you look like one of the biggest things that I'm always telling people is if you want to play like someone, instead of trying to copy what they're doing, try to figure out how they learned and like what they were listening to. Like Nile Rodgers was the first one for me where this really happened, the guitarist in Chic. And I had read this Reddit interview with him, and he brought up two names that really inspired him: Freddie Green, George Van Apps. And I'd never heard of either of them. And really, like, that pulled me through a ton, just like, especially the George Van Epp stuff, which, if you're not familiar, he was the seven-string jazz guitar player that really did a lot of stuff with the voice leading, moving chords through scale, stuff like that. And then if you can understand, okay, so how did jazz guitar turn into Le Freak, or how did it turn into Random Access Memories, that kind of stuff. Once you can kind of understand that connection, you can kind of use that approach, I think, to so many other things that you're doing. So that was a really liberating thing for me. But yeah, I think self-teaching and understanding how people are getting where they are.
This is incredible. Thank you, Alex. I'm going to listen to this one again. And and I can't wait till we get to meet one-on-one again. Um, I'm glad to be your client, and we're very proud that you are an alum of the guitar department. So thank you
Oh,
so much for joining us.
no, thanks for having me. This was really great. And I mean, I'd always watched so many episodes like when I was in school. So yeah, no, it's full circle to be back here.
This is great. Well, thank you, Alex Mack. Thank you, Sheryl Bailey. And thanks, Ben Cody. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I can't imagine a better podcast to end our spring semester here in Boston. We will be with all of you on the next coffee talk, and we're going to hang out for a little longer. So goodbye, everyone, and thank you, Alex.